Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general.
Outlander is the show from Starz Entertainment, all about Claire Fraser and her husband Jamie, a time traveller and her Highlander boyfriend, and him having to come after her after she's just been kidnapped by a bunch of bad people. And episode 12, Never My Love, starts out in the 1970s, where things are all a bit strange, and Claire's hanging out in a big cool fancy house and looking at a painting of her big house on the ridge. And then Jamie comes in, although he looks kind of young and different, and they dance and there's like a big fancy Thanksgiving dinner. And the whole family's there, including people who've died, except for Roger and Brianna who've disappeared. Only then somebody else keeps appearing in the background and making it all a bit weird. Then there's a knock at the door and two cops appear, two very familiar looking cops, and they say that Brianna, Roger and Jamie all died in a car crash. Because of course, none of this is real, it's all some kind of dream or kind of mental state that Claire's escaped to, because it turns out she's actually lying there all tied up and gagged, and she's remembering how she was being kidnapped by the Brown gang, and they were really cross with her for all like the Dr. Rawlings stuff. And then there was this guy called Tebbit who kind of wanted to help her, but he got stopped by the Revenant looking guy. And then there was like this native dude who it turns out is another time traveller, and he wants to help her, but he gets stopped by Lionel. And then Lionel and his laddie and then half the gang take turns raping Claire, and it's all pretty grim. And then meanwhile, Roger and Brianna wake up from their time travelling again, and it turns out they've only been away 5 minutes. Yeah, wasted trip and wasted gems apparently. I can't really work out how that could have happened. So they sort of go home and they spot the burning cross on this hillside, and they speed back to the ridge, and they find that Jamie's already there with like a posse, and Roger and Ian come up and they say, yeah, well, we're going to come with you. And they all do a big ambush on the Browns' campsite, and they find Claire and she's been beat up and traumatised. And Jamie's all like,
kill them all.
So they do a huge big Malky on them, and they manage to miss Lionel, but they find him and they tie him up and they get him home for questioning. And once they get back, it's all tears and hugs and Claire having a kind of bad time with it, but then she finally ventures downstairs to see Lionel and interrogate him, and he's still being an arse, so she just leaves, and after she walks out the room, Parsley takes matters into her own hands and she needles him in the neck with a bunch of hemlock, and that's him dead. And once that's found out, Jamie has to ride back to Browntown and drop dead Lionel at his brother's feet, and he tells him what happened. And to his credit, Tricky Dicky Brown kind of accepts everything, but he leaves Jamie with a warning that there is going to be a reckoning somewhere down the line for this. And after that, everyone tries their best to just get back to normal and feel a bit cheerful in the summer. And the season ends with Jamie and Claire all cuddled up together on a muggy stormy night, and Claire telling Jamie that she feels safe. So what did I think? Well, I mean, straight off the bat, I've got to point something out. And I mean this really in the nicest way possible, because I'm not cross with anyone, but in a lot of ways, this episode was a little bit spoiled for me, because last week's, like most weeks on the show, I did actually say to people to not spoil stuff that was coming up and in the next book or coming up in the next storylines. But a few folk in the comments mentioned that both that Claire got sexually assaulted by the whole Brown gang and that Jamie and the rest of those guys were actually going to kill them all off. So I already kind of knew all that going into this episode, which was kind of a shame. Now, obviously, I know for folk who've read the books, I mean, yeah, it's really exciting and you're getting to see the stuff that you really want to see put on screen for the first time that you love from the books. And it's all like, you know it like the back of your hand. But for me, somebody who hasn't actually read the books, it meant that for the first half of this episode, I kind of knew exactly what was coming, even though obviously I didn't know exactly how it was going to come and happen. I didn't have the benefit of the context of the book and how that's all written. But none of that's a deal breaker, and the episode was still interesting. And it's hardly worth getting upset about, especially here at the end of the season, just before some kind of big extended Outlander. You know, it's just something for folks to bear in mind, just in case you feel that it had maybe an effect on the way that I've interpreted this episode, the way that maybe I felt about it. It might have been different, who knows. But I better put that up front and just, yeah, it's out there. But overall, I thought this was a really curious one for a season finale. I mean, there were some really interesting choices that were made. I mean, right from the start with this whole kind of 70s alternate reality dream sequence stuff. And that was really kind of bizarre at times. But it did remind me very much of the shower sequence from season 4 when Roger, you know, he's been captured by all like the Mohawk supermodel guys. And then he suddenly finds himself back in the 1960s having a shower at home. And it turns out, no, it's just a daydream he's having. And I thought it was very similar along that same sort of line. So, I mean, there's precedent for that in the show. But there was a lot of stuff in this episode that was really well done. And first and foremost, I mean, this was a great episode for performances. I mean, specifically, I mean, this was a great one for Katrina Balfe. I mean, this is probably one of her best ones, if not in the entire whole show so far. Certainly for a few seasons at least. And she runs a full gamut here. You know, she's got sneaky, clever Claire. She's got, like, sensible bargaining Claire. She's got her strong and stoic side and her vulnerability after, like, the horrific, traumatic experience she goes through. And I think this is some really great work. And it's a very bold decision to have her spend the first half of the episode basically kind of beaten and defeated and gagged and tied up most of the time. And in the latter half of the episode, she's really traumatized and suffering from shock. There was no effort here to try and do anything silly, like have her suddenly being all tough and cool and, snarky remarks and things, which is what an awful lot of shows tend to do. And I think it's a really good idea, but it is one that the show actually has done before. This whole episode is kind of reminiscent, and I'll get onto that later on. But I also really, really liked, everybody's favourite show MVP, Lauren Lytle, who was doing her best, like, Harold Shipman bit in Killing Off Her Patient. I mean, she was like a terrifying angel of death, and I really liked that they actually had, like, that part of Parsley's personality coming through on it. And it was a really fascinating moment, not only because it shows that she's got all the courage and resolve of her teacher, and her both her surrogate parents, Claire and Jamie, but it also shows that she still has that darker side that she probably gets from her birth mother, Leary, where she's actually willing to just go that extra step and maybe do the bad thing. It could also be an indication that maybe, the apple doesn't fall that far from the tree, and maybe she is just a little on the psycho side. But on top of that, we also get the reaction, and that was what really sells it completely, because she's not just callous about it or anything else. She doesn't try and cover it up. She's literally just, at the end of the day, a girl who isn't regretful of her actions, but she is actually terrified that she's going to go to hell for what she's done, because she knows that it wasn't probably the right thing to do, but she knew it was probably the just thing to do. And she has straight up just murdered a guy who was technically a patient. And I thought that scene was played really well. I mean, even though it was quite short, but I think it's going to have major repercussions later on the character. And I thought the acting pretty much everywhere else was kind of solid. I mean, the focus obviously wasn't on these other characters, but we did get a sense of like Jamie and the rest and their emotions. I mean, being upset, and especially like Sam doing an awful lot of that sort of pained, stoic, burning up with hurt and fury on the inside, but trying not to show it stuff that, he does really well. And I love the tiny little turn from Chris Larkin, who plays Richard Brown. I mean, it was a really subtle but telling moment. I mean, that's good acting, because we've seen him be basically a bit nasty in that, and we've had this kind of sort of gruff, brash anger from Ned Dennehy, who plays his brother Lionel. But you can see really here that Richard is the smarter, he's the cooler head. He's also probably a much more dangerous and intelligent guy at the end of the day than his brother. And I think he plays it really well. He's this kind of, he's shocked and, clearly upset hearing that his ne'er-do-well brother's just been killed, and basically killed because of his own stupidity and trying to do all this stuff. But also there's this steely anger that, tells that this is a guy who, he thinks he's got the measure of Jamie, and maybe he has. And, Jamie certainly thinks he's got the measure of him. And I kind of like that. We've gotten to the point where actually these are two guys who both basically run an area. Like, Jamie's got the Ridge and this guy's got Brownsville. And effectively what we've got now is kind of a feud coming between two different towns or two different communities. I mean, it's all gone a little bit kind of Hatfield and McCoys. I have actually heard about that, yeah, because I mean, there's a really good miniseries about the Hatfields and McCoys with Kevin Costner and Bill Paxton. You should totally check it out. It's worth watching. But yeah, I'm also really pleased that they introduced a new time traveller, although it was one with slightly strange priorities. And he's not going to be a good guy going forward, because as Claire herself points out, he didn't help her. And this is the kind of show where, if you didn't help her, you're a baddie. Yeah, that's just how it goes. But we also found out that Bree and Roger didn't make it to the past, and that's interesting from the time travel point of view. And they somehow ended up just not really going anywhere. And they made a kind of throwaway line about them thinking, Bree says something about, I was thinking about home. And I suspect, though, this wasn't actually anything to do with them at all, because they made such a big point of showing that Jamie hears everything like the stone's louder, and he manages to crack the stone. And I'm wondering if he's got like super time travel abilities, because clearly he's like the most sensitive to this time travel thing than out of all of them. So maybe it was actually more him thinking about it, because maybe he's more powerful and he manages to control it more, because maybe where else would he be thinking of? He doesn't know anywhere else, so they're thinking of this other time, but maybe he directs it because he was more powerful. Anyway, I mean, I could be totally way off base there, but I kind of felt there was a subtle implication of that there. And it opens up a whole new kettle of fish with the time travel stuff going forward. But, on the other hand, I mean, I have to be honest, in some ways this is kind of a mess of an episode. I mean, it was really all over the place, structurally, stylistically, and even some of the cinematography and shot choices were kind of flat and dull. I mean, I'm not saying they were terrible. I mean, it wasn't badly shot. The show generally isn't. This was good stuff as well. I mean, nice choices like kind of that fiery sky stuff in the kill party, and like the final shot of Jamie and Claire. That was really good. But that whole 1960s bit, I mean, what was that all about? I mean, ironically, I actually think they would have made more sense of that if they just run it as one scene rather than like lots of little moments here and there. And it was odd cutting it back and forth between Claire lying all gagged and stuff, and it just didn't work for me. It was too bitty and all over the place. It didn't feel like there was a structure and a system to it. And I get it was meant to be like a fever dream of her sort of half waking up from this horrible mental place, but I kind of also felt like that it was a little bit mawkish and silly. I mean, why was Ian a GI, and what the hell was Myrta wearing? And like, there was so much symbolism and stuff, and they really crammed it in. I mean, they kept showing you this orange, and there was this wee callback to this rabbit. I mean, remember they actually had the rabbit in the Culloden Battlefield episode. I mean, maybe it's supposed to tie into that, I'm not sure. There was this choice to do this as all bitty flashbacks, crossed with the choice not to have an opening title intro sequence. Totally threw me, because they didn't. There was no intro sequence this week. And waiting the whole time for that to start kind of threw me out of things a bit. And then obviously I realised after a while, they're just not going to do that. Once it was about 10-15 minutes in. But it left me a little bit confused and on edge, which I would think was the point, but rather than me being invested in it, it actually pulled me out of the experience, and it never really came together the way I thought it should have done. And I felt like this was an idea that maybe was part of a bigger bit in the episode, and maybe they've drastically edited it down or something. I mean, maybe originally this was just a big long scene, and then they've cut it between it. I mean, they've done things like that on the show before. But I was surprised because this was actually a really short episode. I mean, and for a season finale, that's unusual. I mean, this was only a 50-minute long episode. And normally it's about an hour, or sometimes an hour and 5 minutes. I mean, that's 10 to 15 minutes shorter than it is normally. And especially considering that I'm sure the finale of last season episode was about an hour and a half. And it kind of shows. And it shows because, a bit like last week's penultimate episode, there was actually not enough story to even fill what was in the episode. There was an awful lot of dithering and time wasting, and just long shots of things and not much dialogue and not a lot happening. And I'm not saying that nothing happened in this episode, because that isn't true. But if you were to do like a point by point plot thing, again, not an awful lot. A bit like I said, you could write it on the back of a hanky. But the other thing about this episode, it was basically a reworking of the last episode of season 1. Think about it, because in that episode, Jamie had been captured, they sprung him out of jail, and there was loads of flashbacks and things to what happened to him, and then they looked after him, and then they had a sort of victory at the end when he cut the thing off, and then they had a moment of peace looking forward to the future. Now this time round we've got Claire, and she's been having flashbacks first, then she gets rescued, then they have a kind of this moral victory type moment, and then there's the ending of them looking forward to the future and the oncoming storm. I mean, you don't get much more obvious symbolism than an oncoming storm, but I mean, at least in this they didn't have a Mexican guy popping up to say,
he said there's a storm coming in.
But there was also a weird thing this week with the dialogue. Not only because at first when Ringlet's McFutureboy turned up and he said to Claire something about Ringo Starr, I actually couldn't understand what he was saying. I mean, I don't know if it was the mix or the volume or something, but it was just very kind of about it, and I couldn't really understand what he was saying. And I realised he was saying, oh, do you know Ringo Starr? And it felt like that stood out, partially because I heard Parsley saying,
well, we're thinking of something a bit more hip, like Ringo.
Like Ringo.
Everyone.
And that felt really odd because it was a really out of place line because you heard it really prominently. And I was like, why did that line pop up? Because everything else had fitted better and that didn't really fit. And it was obviously so that you had the word in your head ready to go. And I presume that was because it's supposed to be clear, we're not seeing this obviously in order, we're seeing this sort of all over the place. It's a bit like when Jamie was lying on the battlefield at Culloden, that his mind sort of dotting around all over the place. And I get that that was also what they were going for in this. But that bit just didn't really quite work. And the other dialogue thing was there was so many lines of dialogue that felt really, really written, if you know what I mean. Stuff like, everyone pontificating in awkward speeches rather than just talking normally like they do on the show. And I really noticed it when Richard gave that speech to Jamie, and it was so obviously a big speech moment.
You called me. At the gathering, at the fire. Stand by my side, son of my house. Well, I meant to too. There are times for men of peace. And a time for men of blood. I will stand by you.
And then there was that whole bit when Parsley was talking about going to hell, and she suddenly said the whole thing about...
He thought me no better than the dirt under his boot. A mere woman of no consequence.
And I thought that was strange. That's an odd line. And then the whole bit at the end with Jamie doing that speech, part of which was on the promo for this week's episode. But yeah, it felt kind of contrived. And all that pulled me out of the episode because I felt like I was watching like an amateur theatre production or something rather than an episode of Outlander. And maybe it's just that they just decided to go that way because it was a season finale, or maybe it's all straight from the book. But if it is, then it's a little bit self-indulgent, is it not? And again, speaking of self-indulgence, it's Diana Gabaldon, so of course we can't make it through a full season without somebody being sexually assaulted on the show. And I don't think I need to run through all this again because I've mentioned it before, but the show manages at least one non-consensual sex scene every season. And depressingly, they don't always do that much with it in character terms. I mean, remember Ian? Yeah, remember? He had to sleep with Galis. He didn't want to, but she made him. No, we've all forgotten that, haven't we? Yeah, I mean, and remember, they also forgot that, he'd actually met Bonnet before when they were having him dress up to pretend to meet Bonnet the other week, when he was meant to be Alexander Malcolm. Yeah, they forgot about that as well. But yeah, most of the problems I had with this week were structural, and a lot of them were actually a good microcosm of the season as a whole. Because you see, the season as a whole felt kind of bitty, and at times it was kind of directionless, and everyone was in a wee bit of a dither, and there was lots of little ideas going this way, but then they were cut off, and then they went this other way, and they got cut off. I mean, put it this way, this is an episode where Roger and Bree made a 2-week journey away, and they managed to make that 2-week journey back in one night, just in time to see the fire, because it was literally the same day that Claire got taken away, as far as the last episode told us, that they said, it's taken them 2 weeks to get there, Ian should just be about to come back. And then when they got back, they decided that, because they thought of home, then the Stones must treat that place at home, so that must be their home, so they should just treat that like their home. We're home now, everyone's happy. No, that kind of twee nonsense doesn't work for me. Not at all. I mean, you mean to say that they didn't actually have a conversation about this and say, right, think of 1978, just 1978 going through your head, 1978, and drill that into them and into Jemmy. Have they not even discussed this? Are these people really thick? Have they? I mean, I know they're not time travellers, but they've had 2 weeks of a journey to talk about this on the way up there. I mean, come on now. Honestly, I know I'm probably expecting too much complicated stuff, and I've been disappointed by TV shows a lot recently with that, expecting things to be cleverer than they actually turn out to be. Especially with all that, the fact that it didn't work makes a mockery of the whole of last week and all the goodbying. They skipped over all the awkward conversations that they need to have with everyone saying that the whole Boston University trip thing was a lie. Especially explaining that to Lizzie and everyone. But this was also an episode that kind of dithered around the idea that somehow the Browns thought that blowing up the still would make the men of the Ridge so busy that they wouldn't actually come chasing after them. I mean, let's face it, they are not the most harmless and placid of men. I mean, Jamie and Roger and Fergus, I mean, these people go around doing killing on people all the time. I mean, yeah. I mean, maybe not Roger, but he has now. He's actually did a proper killing now. But yeah, they expected they wouldn't rush after them. I mean, these are literally people who led a militia. Led a militia. But then again, as we said, Lionel's not the brightest of people. But anyway, skipping over the fact that also they managed to track down the bad guys in a few hours with almost zero problems, and the show skipped over that completely, but then the show skipped over whether or not they killed off Tebbit or the Native American time traveller guy. I mean, I think they said that he wasn't amongst the dead. But what about Tebbit? Why introduce him if you're going to kill him off? And if these people weren't killed off, why not show that they got away? Or why not show something else? Because presumably they're just keeping that in their pocket just in case they need it up ahead. And the show's getting a bit predictable in that way. So yeah, I mean, it was an episode that was kind of straggly and a bit all over the shop for about 2/3 of it, and then pointing in directions that it lost interest in halfway through, and then returning to a kind of aimless sort of normality in the last third, only to end on a strange note in a scene that was slightly out of place and just kind of stopped, with a little bit unresolved stuff and lots of other things put to bed too early or in an unsatisfactory manner. And I've got to be honest, that's basically my rundown of Season 5 as a whole, as well as this episode. And what next? Well, I mean, here we are at the end of Season 5 with 2 main plot lines coming up that we know about, and those are the big bad Brown vengeance and the big war coming down the line in a couple of years. And I'm left wondering what the story's going to do and where it's going, because a huge part of the issue for me for this season of Outlander, as much as I said in my Outlander video before the season started, is a lack of things for the character to do in terms of ongoing motivations. And all the ones that they had at the beginning of Season 4 basically have all gone. And I've mentioned Claire especially back then because there was a whole season where Claire's struggles have basically largely to do with penicillin and a bit of doctoring stuff week to week and not really having an overall arc. And I said that was a problem back then, and it's been a problem all this season. I mean, it was basically we were watching Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman, as I said. And the show, and maybe the books as well, that may be where this is coming from, have kind of got stuck in a soap opera mode for Claire's character. I mean, at least now she actually has some trauma to get through, and I think it would be a disservice to the characters and the show if they don't essentially spend some or all of next season with her working through all this. I mean, this should be a big character thing. I mean, they spent half of Season 2 of the show getting Jamie through his rape, and this is a much worse situation for her. And similarly, we've now got Bree and Roger, and they seem to have gotten past their let's go back to the future plans through kind of a bit of a plot contrivance and a lot of time wasting. So unless they literally pull a Rocky 2 and, you know, have them totally change their minds at the beginning of next season, then they're basically in the same boat as Claire was last season. Kind of as is Jamie, who doesn't even have the whole, you know, I've got to hunt down and kill my godfather and I don't really want to, but I actually know where he is situation that he had all the way through this season. Yeah, he's got the upcoming war in his mind, but it's not like he's got Tryon breathing down his neck telling him he's going to go and fight it on the wrong side. So yeah, I'm slightly concerned that we're going to have another season a bit like season 5, a bit all over the place. And I'm a little bit worried about the show going onwards, since in a lot of ways, an awful lot of the plot lines are basically dead in the water in this point. And since there's no way they can do the entire whole of the 8 years of like the War of the Revolution in one season, I mean, not without going completely insane and doing it in a totally different style, especially because North Carolina apparently has quite a major part to play in a lot of things that happened in the war, then I suspect that we're only either going to get the very start of it, or, I mean, maybe the show's going to cover it for a bunch of seasons. I mean, maybe the show actually... I mean, I don't mind people tell me, you know, don't tell me plot particulars, but I'd actually be quite curious to know if people could tell me the vague timeline of the next few books in terms of, like, what years they cover. Basically, yeah, the next couple of books. I mean, are we going to actually get through the whole of, like, the war in, like, 2 books or something? Or, because I think there's about 3 more books to go, and another couple she's still got to write or something. But yeah, that would be something I'd be quite interested to hear. But again, don't tell me loads of plot particulars, and I definitely don't want to know if there's any really big twists or anything like that. But yeah, but that would be a cool thing to find out. But the next question is the whole show going to change from Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman into something else, something like Turn or Sons of Liberty, like one of these shows about the War of Revolution? Because, not being funny, but I've always thought that I was in the minority in the audience in the show, being a guy who actually likes war films and stuff, and that the normal audience for Outlander is ladies who want to see historical drama and romance, and or, you know, their long-suffering husbands. And fair play to, like, herself, you know, because she does seem to want to do some war stuff in the stories, despite, you know, in between all, like, the drama and all the soap opera and all the sex and stuff. So it kind of makes sense she would do something a bit different. And it makes sense to have Claire in a war because, I mean, let's face it, she has the training. I mean, she even mentioned this week that she has, you know, literally lived through a world war. And we've seen that. We've seen, like, her actually being, like, in and around soldiers and troops and death and all that stuff. So I'm kind of at a quandary now. I mean, obviously, I'm not saying I'm not going to watch the show. I totally am, and I do enjoy it, and I'm invested in the characters now. But I can't see how this show can continue as the show that it was when it started 5 years ago. And I know, and I've said before, that it's a good thing that it's grown and changed. But in some ways, I feel like it's been a little stuck in the mud at this point, and maybe it's about to jump off in a new direction, and I think that would actually do it some good. But yeah, that's another season of Outlander in the can, and time to concentrate on some other shows and things. And as you know, I've been watching Westworld, but that finished up last week, and my video for the finale has been held up a little bit because I had a lot on last week. But my plan going forward is to finish up my movies by month videos, and also to finish up season 1 of A Handmaid's Tale, because yeah, I never actually finished that. I've never actually watched any further than the episodes I reviewed, because I always wanted to finish it off. And after that, I'm going to try doing some other things. I think I might try doing something different, because the one thing that holds me up from a lot of my reviews is actually the fact that I can't watch the next episode or something until I've done the review, and that takes some time. So it means if I actually have to watch an episode, do a review, watch an episode, do a review, and I've got the whole season sitting there in front of me, that actually puts me off reviewing it. So what I might do is something similar to the Star Trek Discovery, what happened in season 1 video that I did, where I might actually watch a show and then do a little review and just basically do a rundown of what happens in that season, so people who have seen it can, you know, get a refresher, and people who maybe aren't going to bother watching it actually know what I'm talking about. So yeah, let's try that, and we'll see how things go. And I'll keep this content coming, and I would love it if you all stick around. I mean, I know a lot of my fans on here are only here for like watching the Outlander videos, and that's totally fine, yeah. But I've got heaps of other content on the channel already, so there might be some other shows that you're interested in watching stuff about, and kind of hope that there's stuff for everyone to find here. So yeah, till next time, I've been Ian, and these have been my grumpy opinions. And shout out to my top tier patrons, Michelle Forbes and Judith Coloma. Thanks guys. Done to all my patrons, thanks so much, and to all my viewers. You really warm my heart, you've made everything really good during this lockdown. Keep the comments coming, keep watching the videos, and I'll keep making them. And everybody take care, stay safe, and stay well. Bye bye.